3 months ago, Raven Creek lay beneath a sky the color of old bruises, the kind that never quite heal right. August heat still clung to the Montana territory like a fever, even as the sun bled out behind the western peaks. The main street was empty, save for a few horses tied outside the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Their tails switched at flies, their heads hung low with the patience animals have when they know the night will be long and their riders drunk. Rose Calloway walked quickly. She carried a satchel of books against her hip. Schoolteacher, 32 years old, dark hair pinned back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple calico, dusty at the hem from the walk between the schoolhouse and her boarding room. She'd taught reading to 12 children that day. Tomorrow, she'd teach them arithmetic. Tomorrow never came. The alley between Hutchins' General Store and the old assay office was the fastest route. Rose had walked it 100 times. The light was dying fast, but she knew every board, every nailhead, every place the mud dried in ruts. She didn't see them until it was too late. 6 men, horses tied in the shadows behind the assay office. Whiskey bottles passed between hands that had forgotten gentleness years ago. The Van Gang. Most folks just called them Trouble and crossed the street when they saw them coming. Silas Van sat on a barrel, his hat pushed back, his face flushed with drink and something darker. Rage that builds in a man when his plans fall apart and he needs someone to blame. The stage robbery that morning had been a disaster. The strongbox they'd been promised contained nothing but account ledgers and worthless paper. No gold, no cash. Nothing but the shame of wasted bullets and a dead driver who'd never see his grandchildren. Van needed to make someone pay, to prove he was still dangerous, still in control. Rose's footsteps on the packed earth stopped him mid-sentence. She froze when she saw them. Her eyes went wide, not fear yet, just surprise, that half-heartbeat before fear arrives. "Well now," Van said. His voice was whiskey rough. "Look what wandered into the wrong place." Rose's hand tightened on her satchel. She took a step backward. Behind a stack of empty crates, a boy watched. Zachary Webb, 12 years old. He'd been looking for his cat when he heard the voices. Now he crouched low, his heart hammering against his ribs, praying they wouldn't see him too. "I don't want trouble," Rose said. Her voice was steady, steadier than it should have been. "I'm just passing through." "Passing through," Van repeated. He stood slowly. The others stood with him. 6 men forming a semicircle, blocking the alley's exit. "You know what happened today, schoolteacher?" Rose said nothing. She was calculating distances, the space between herself and the street. Too far. The gap between Van and his men. Too narrow. "I asked you a question," Van said. "I don't know what happened to you today," Rose said quietly, "but it's got nothing to do with me." Van's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. A casual movement practiced 1,000 times. "Everything's got something to do with somebody," Van said. What happened next took less than 5 seconds. Van drew. The sound of the gunshot was massive in the narrow alley. It echoed off brick walls and wooden siding, rolling through the twilight like thunder. Rose Calloway's body jerked backward. The satchel fell. Books spilled across the dirt. McGuffey's Reader, a volume of Wordsworth, a child's primer with a broken spine. She tried to speak, her mouth moved, but only blood came out. She collapsed. Behind the crates, Zachary Webb bit down on his own hand to keep from screaming. Tears streamed down his face. Rose's chest rose once, twice. Then her eyes found something in the darkening sky. Her lips moved, barely a whisper. "Tell my papa." The words were faint, floating on her last breath. "Forgive himself." Then she was still. Zachary heard it. Every word. He would carry them like stones for 3 months. Van holstered his gun. He looked down at the body with the same expression a man might give a dog he'd just put down. "Anybody asks," he said to his men, "we were playing cards all evening. Understand?" They understood. They always understood. Jack Scarface Vance stood to the side, his hand on his own gun. The long scar running from his left eye to his jawline pulled tight as his jaw clenched. He said nothing. The others nodded. Dutch, Carson, Reeves, Tully, Dobbs. 6 men, 1 dead woman, 1 witness no one knew about. The Van gang mounted their horses and rode out the back way, toward the hills where the law didn't reach and questions didn't get asked. Zachary stayed hidden until long after dark, until his legs cramped and his tears dried, and the night insects started their chorus. Only then did he run. He told no one, not his mother, not the sheriff, no one. He knew what happened to people who crossed Silas Van. He'd found his father 2 years ago, hanging from a barn rafter. The sheriff had called it suicide. Zachary had seen the bruises on his father's knuckles, the kind you get from fighting back. So Zachary ran, out of town, into the canyons, into the wild places where a boy could disappear. And Rose Calloway was buried 3 days later in the town cemetery, under a simple wooden marker that gave her name and years, but nothing of who she'd been. The sheriff ruled it a robbery gone wrong. Tragic. Unfortunate. No suspects. Case closed. 200 miles southeast, in the Wyoming Territory just shy of the Montana border, Thaddeus Calloway woke to a sky washed clean by yesterday's rain. He was 68 years old. His beard had gone silver years ago, and his face carried lines from squinting into too many sunrises across too many empty plains. His hands were scarred and weathered, but steady. Hands that had spent a lifetime working with leather and rope and steel. The Calloway Ranch wasn't much. 640 acres of rough grazing land, a creek that ran year-round if you were lucky, and a house built from logs his grandfather had cut in 1849. But it was paid for. It was quiet. And after 18 years, Thaddeus had almost convinced himself he'd found peace. Almost. He dressed in the dim pre-dawn light. Wool shirt, canvas pants, boots that had been resoled twice. The motions were automatic. 30 years of habit don't fade just because a man hangs up his guns. The guns. They were wrapped in oilcloth at the back of his wardrobe. A Colt Peacemaker, .45 caliber, with walnut grips worn smooth from use. A Winchester rifle, model of '73, with a 24-inch barrel and a trigger pull he'd adjusted himself until it broke clean at 2.5 pounds. Thaddeus hadn't touched either in 18 years. He made coffee on the wood stove, strong and black, coffee that could wake the dead. He drank it standing at the window, watching the first light touch the peaks to the west. His wife had loved this view. Margaret. She died 5 years ago come autumn. Heart gave out in her sleep. The doctor said she hadn't suffered. Thaddeus hoped that was true. Their daughter Rose had been here for the funeral. She'd stayed a week, helping him sort through her mother's things, trying to fill the silence with words neither of them quite believed. Then she'd gone back to Raven Creek, back to her teaching, back to the life she'd built 200 miles away. Thaddeus saw her maybe twice a year after that. Christmas, if the passes were clear. Sometimes in summer. Not enough. Never enough. He finished his coffee and went out to feed the horses. That's when he saw the rider, a young man on a bay mare, coming up the long approach to the ranch house. He wore the dust of hard miles and carried himself with the careful posture of someone bearing bad news. Thaddeus set down the feed bucket and waited. The rider dismounted. He was maybe 25. His face was sunburned and his eyes apologetic. "Mr. Calloway?" he asked. "That's right." The young man reached into his saddlebag and withdrew an envelope. His hand shook slightly as he held it out. "I'm sorry, sir. I was asked to deliver this from Raven Creek." Thaddeus took the envelope. It was sealed with wax, his name written in a careful hand across the front. "Who sent you?" Thaddeus asked. "The sheriff, sir. Sheriff Dunn. He said it was urgent." Thaddeus looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he tore it open. The letter was short. "Mr. Calloway, it is with deep regret that I must inform you of the death of your daughter, Miss Rose Calloway. She was killed on the evening of August 14th in what appears to have been a robbery. She did not suffer. We have buried her in the town cemetery with all appropriate respects. My condolences for your loss. Sheriff Marcus Dunn, Raven Creek, Montana Territory." Thaddeus read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. His hands were still steady. His face showed nothing. But something inside him, something that had been sleeping for 18 years, opened one eye. "You all right, sir?" the messenger asked. Thaddeus looked at him, through him, to some distant point only he could see. "How long ago?" Thaddeus asked. 3 months, sir. Sheriff only found your address last week. Sent me soon as he knew where you were." 3 months. His daughter had been in the ground for 3 months, and he hadn't known. Hadn't felt it. Hadn't sensed the tearing of that thread that binds parent to child across any distance. "Thank you," Thaddeus said. His voice was flat, empty. "There's water for your horse at the trough. Food in the house if you're hungry." "I appreciate it, sir, but I should be getting back." The young man remounted and turned his horse toward the trail. He looked back once, as if he wanted to say something more, something comforting. But the look on Thaddeus Calloway's face stopped the words in his throat. He rode away quickly. Thaddeus stood in the yard for a long time after the rider disappeared. The sun climbed higher. The horses grew impatient for their feed. But Thaddeus didn't move. Finally, he walked back into the house. He went to his bedroom, opened the wardrobe, pulled out the oilcloth bundle. The Colt Peacemaker gleamed dully in the morning light. He'd cleaned it and oiled it before wrapping it up 18 years ago. The weapon of a younger man. A harder man. A man who'd worn a badge and walked into dark places and come out the other side, covered in other men's blood. Thaddeus Calloway had been that man once. He'd sworn he'd never be that man again. He laid the revolver on his bed, then the rifle, then the gun belt with its leather loops for cartridges. The badge was there too, at the bottom of the bundle. Tarnished silver, 5 points. The words, United States Marshal, stamped across the center. He picked it up, turned it over in his palm. 18 years ago, he'd promised Margaret he was done. No more hunting, no more killing, no more coming home with that look in his eyes that made her afraid to touch him. He'd kept that promise, until now. The journey from Wyoming to Raven Creek took 5 days. Thaddeus rode alone. He'd always worked alone. It was how he'd operated in the old days, back when he'd carried the badge, and men had called him things like the Gallows Marshal and Calloway the Cold. He traveled light, bedroll, canvas duster, Winchester in a saddle scabbard, the Colt on his hip, hidden beneath the duster's long skirts. Enough jerky and hardtack to see him through, and a canteen that he refilled at every creek and spring. The land between Wyoming and Montana was harsh. Badlands and alkali flats, sagebrush and greasewood. Country that tested a man's resolve and his horse's stamina. Thaddeus rode through it without hurry. He thought about Rose. She'd been 7 the first time he'd taught her to shoot. A little revolver, .22 caliber, that kicked less than a startled rabbit. She'd been so proud when she hit the tin can on her 3rd try. "Did you see, Papa?" she'd shouted. "Did you see?" He'd seen. He'd seen a lot of things over the years. Most of them he wished he could forget. On the 3rd day, he crossed into Montana territory. The land changed. More trees, more water. The peaks of the Rockies visible to the west, still carrying snow even in late summer. He made camp that night beside a nameless creek. He built a small fire and boiled coffee, and sat watching the flames until they burned down to coals. A coyote called from somewhere in the darkness. Another answered. Their voices rose and fell in eerie harmony, sounds that make men check their rifle loads and move closer to the fire. Thaddeus didn't move closer. He'd spent too many nights alone in wild country to fear coyotes. There were worse things in the dark. Most of them walked on 2 legs. He thought about the letter. She did not suffer. Lies, probably. Lies men told to make terrible things easier to bear. But Thaddeus wanted to believe them anyway. On the 5th day, he saw Raven Creek in the distance. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 300 souls if you counted generous. 1 main street, a dozen buildings that mattered, and twice that many that didn't. A town that grew up around a creek crossing and never quite decided if it wanted to thrive or fade away. Thaddeus stopped on a rise overlooking the valley. The sun was low, painting everything in shades of amber and blood red. Shadows stretched long across the dirt streets. From this distance, Raven Creek looked peaceful, quiet, a place where a woman might teach school and feel safe walking home in the evening. But Thaddeus had learned long ago that distance hides the truth. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks and rode down toward the town. People noticed him as he entered. An old man in a long duster, his hat pulled low against the slanting sun. A stranger. They always noticed strangers. A woman sweeping her porch stopped mid-stroke and watched him pass. 2 men outside the livery stable paused their conversation to track his progress. A dog started barking, then thought better of it and slunk away. Thaddeus rode slowly, taking it all in. The bank, the general store, the assay office, the sheriff's office with its barred windows and tired paint, and there, at the end of the street, the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Its doors were propped open to catch what little breeze the evening offered. Light spilled out into the street. The sound of men's voices, rough and careless, drifted on the air. Thaddeus guided his horse to the hitching rail outside the saloon. He dismounted with the stiffness of a man who'd spent 5 days in the saddle. His knees creaked, his back protested, but his hands were still steady as he looped the reins around the rail. He stood for a moment, looking at those open doors. Beyond them he could see men at tables, cards and coins, whiskey glasses catching the lamplight, the bartender wiping at the bar with a rag that had seen better days. And in the back corner, at a round table beneath a mounted elk head, 6 men sat watching the room with the attention of predators in a world of prey. Thaddeus had seen their kind before, many times, in many towns. He adjusted his duster, making sure the Colt was hidden but accessible. Then he walked through those doors. The sound of conversation didn't stop, not at first. He was just another drifter, another old-timer looking for a drink and a warm place to sit. The bartender glanced up. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, with a face that had forgotten how to smile and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Eli, though Thaddeus didn't know that yet. "Help you?" Eli asked. "Whiskey," Thaddeus said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, a voice that expected to be heard. Eli poured, pushed the glass across the scarred wood of the bar. Thaddeus didn't touch it. He stood there, his hands resting on the bar's edge, his eyes moving across the room in a slow sweep. He saw the card players, the drifters nursing drinks in corners, the saloon girl in a faded dress trying to coax smiles from men who'd forgotten what joy looked like. And he saw the 6 men in the corner. They were watching him now, not obviously, but watching. Thaddeus picked up the glass, looked at it. The amber liquid caught the light like trapped fire. Then he spoke, not loud, but in a voice that cut through the noise and the smoke and the pretense like a blade through silk. "My name is Thaddeus Calloway." The conversation died. Every head turned. Thaddeus set the glass down without drinking. "3 months ago," he continued, "my daughter Rose died in this town." Silence absolute now. Even the card players had frozen mid-shuffle. "I've come a long way," Thaddeus said. His eyes found the corner table, found the 6 men there. "And I'm only asking once." He paused. The moment stretched. Somewhere outside a horse whinnied. The sound seemed to come from very far away. "Who took my daughter's life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then one of the men at the corner table laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, more bark than humor. "Old man," the laughter said, "you lost your damn mind?" The others joined in. Nervous laughter, sounds men make when they're trying to convince themselves everything's fine and nothing bad is about to happen. Thaddeus didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just stood there, his gaze locked on that corner table with the patience of stone. The laughter faltered, died. One of the 6 men, the one with a scar running from his left eye to his jawline, leaned back in his chair. Jack Scarface Vance. He wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Accidents happen, Grandpa," Scarface said. "This is rough country. People die. Best you move along before you get yourself hurt." Thaddeus studied the man for a long moment, studied all of them, taking in details, the way they sat, where their hands rested, which ones looked nervous and which ones looked mean. Silas Van sat at the center, young, maybe 30, lean and wiry, with a face that might have been handsome before cruelty carved lines into it. To his left, Dutch and Carson, both in their 20s, eager, stupid. To his right, Reeves and Tully, older, more cautious, more dangerous. And Scarface, the one with the scar and eyes that had seen things. "I'll be staying," Thaddeus said quietly. He turned back to the bar, picked up the whiskey glass. This time he drank, tossed it back in one smooth motion, didn't flinch at the burn. He set the glass down with a soft click. Then he walked out. Behind him, the silence held for another 5 seconds before breaking into urgent whispers. At the corner table, The 6 men exchanged looks. "Who the hell was that?" Carson muttered. Scarface shook his head, but his hand had drifted down to rest on the butt of his revolver. And in his eyes, beneath the manufactured calm, something flickered. Recognition. Fear. At the bar, Eli, the bartender, wiped at a spot that didn't need wiping. His hands were shaking slightly. He knew that name. Thaddeus Calloway. He'd heard it years ago, back when he'd worked a saloon in Dodge City. Stories of a U.S. Marshal who never brought anyone back alive, who gave criminals one chance to surrender, and only one. The Gallows Marshal, they'd called him. Eli glanced toward the corner table, toward Silas Van and his men. Then he looked at the door where Thaddeus Calloway had disappeared into the Montana night. And Eli knew, with certainty born from having seen these things before, that Raven Creek was about to earn its name. Thaddeus spent the night in a boarding house 3 streets back from the main drag. The room was small and spare. A bed with a straw mattress that had seen better decades. A wash stand with a cracked basin. A window looking onto an alley where cats fought and trash accumulated. He didn't sleep. He sat in the room's single chair, positioned to see both door and window, and waited for dawn. The Colt rested on his thigh, loaded, ready. Old habits. Outside, Raven Creek settled into nighttime rhythms. Drunks stumbled home. The saloon finally went dark around 2 in the morning. A dog barked at shadows. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and distance. Thaddeus thought about the men at that corner table, 6 of them, all young enough to be fast, old enough to be dangerous. Men who wore their guns low and their consciences buried even lower. One of them had killed Rose. Maybe all of them. The question was, which one would break first? When the sky began to lighten, Thaddeus rose. He splashed water on his face from the basin. The water was cold and rust-stained. It did nothing to wash away 3 months' grief, but it woke him up. He strapped on the gun belt, checked the Colt's action, 6 rounds in the cylinder. He'd learned long ago never to carry an empty chamber under the hammer. That old safety precaution had gotten more men killed than it had ever saved. He left the boarding house before the proprietor woke. The streets were empty in the pre-dawn gray. Raven Creek looked different in this light. Smaller, more fragile, like a stage set that might blow away in a strong wind. Thaddeus walked toward the general store. According to the faded sign, it opened at 7. He had 20 minutes to wait. He spent them standing in the shadow of the mercantile across the street, watching, learning the town's patterns. Who woke early, who didn't, where the sightlines were good and where they weren't. The storekeeper arrived at 6:50, an older man, 70 if he was a day, moving with the careful stiffness of arthritic joints. He unlocked the door and went inside. A lamp flickered to life in the window. Thaddeus gave him 5 minutes. Then he crossed the street and went in. The bell above the door announced his arrival with a cheerful jangle that seemed obscene in the morning quiet. The storekeeper looked up from where he was arranging tins on a shelf. His eyes were pale blue and sharp, despite his years. They took in Thaddeus with assessment that missed nothing. "Morning," the storekeeper said. His voice was neutral, careful. "Morning," Thaddeus replied. He moved into the store slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. "Name's Calloway." The storekeeper's hands paused in their work, just for a second, then continued. "Ben Hutchins," he said. "This is my place." "I'm looking for information," Thaddeus said. "I sell goods, not gossip." My daughter died here 3 months ago. Rose Calloway. She was a teacher. Ben set down the tin he'd been holding. He turned to face Thaddeus fully now. I remember her, Ben said quietly. Good woman. Patient with the children. Didn't deserve what happened. What did happen? Ben glanced toward the door, then the windows, making sure they were alone. Official story is robbery, Ben said. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sheriff ruled it accidental death during commission of a crime. And the unofficial story? Ben was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There's a boy. Name's Zachary Webb. He was 12 when it happened. He saw something. Then he disappeared. Been living out in the canyons ever since. Wild as a coyote and twice as skittish. Thaddeus felt something shift inside him. The first solid piece of information in 3 months of nothing. Where in the canyons? He asked. Devil's Canyon. About 3 miles north. There's old mines up there. Abandoned since the silver played out in '78. Boy holes up in one of them, folks say. Who are folks? The ones brave enough to talk when the Van gang isn't listening. There it was. A name. Van, Thaddeus repeated. Silas Van. Ben nodded slowly. And his men. 6 of them total. They run things around here. Sheriff Dunn, he doesn't cross them. Most folks don't. Why not? Because people who cross Silas Van have a habit of dying. Accidents mostly. At least that's what the death certificates say. Thaddeus absorbed this, filed it away with everything else he was learning about Raven Creek. The boy's father, Thaddeus said. What happened to him? Ben's face went hard. Deputy Webb. Good man. Honest. 2 years back, he started asking questions about some cattle that went missing from the Broken J Ranch. Found himself hanging from a barn rafter a week later. Sheriff ruled it suicide. But it wasn't. Deputy Webb had a wife and 3 kids. He'd just ordered lumber to add a room onto his house. You tell me if that sounds like a man planning to kill himself. Thaddeus said nothing. But something in his eyes must have shown, because Ben took a step back. You're not just a grieving father, Ben said. It wasn't a question. I used to wear a badge, Thaddeus said. Long time ago. How long? 18 years? Ben studied him, taking in the weathered face, the calm stance. The way Thaddeus stood with his weight balanced and his coat pushed back just enough to clear the gun at his hip. You were more than just a deputy, Ben said. Thaddeus didn't answer. He turned toward the door. Mr. Calloway, Ben called after him. That boy, Zachary, he's scared. He won't trust easy. Thaddeus paused, looked back. I'm not here to scare him, he said. I'm here to find out what he saw. He left before Ben could respond. Devil's Canyon lived up to its name. The trail north out of Raven Creek climbed into broken country, red rock and sage. Juniper twisted by wind into shapes that looked almost human in the right light. Or the wrong light. Thaddeus rode slowly, reading the land with skills learned 40 years ago when he'd first pinned on a badge. Looking for signs, tracks, disturbances in the natural order of things. He found the canyon entrance around noon. It was a slash in the earth, narrow at the mouth, widening as it cut back into the hills. The walls rose 50 feet on either side, striped with layers of ancient stone. A seasonal creek had carved it over millennia, but the creek was dry now. Just sand and smooth rocks worn round by water that came and went with the snows. Thaddeus dismounted, left his horse ground-tied in a patch of scrub grass. He went in on foot. The canyon was cooler than the open land, shaded. The walls blocked the sun for all but a few hours at midday. His boots made soft sounds on the sand. Somewhere ahead, a raven called. The sound echoed off stone like a warning. The mine entrances were obvious once he knew what to look for. Dark holes in the canyon walls, shored up with timbers that had gone gray with age and weather. Some had collapsed, others gaped like mouths waiting to swallow the unwary. Thaddeus approached the first one carefully, stopped 10 feet away. "Zachary Webb," he called, not loud, just enough to carry. "My name is Thaddeus Calloway. I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. He tried the second mine, then the third. At the fourth, something moved in the darkness. Thaddeus froze, kept his hands visible and away from his gun. "Zachary," he said again, "I'm Rose Calloway's father, the teacher. She was my daughter." More movement, then a voice, young, frightened. "You're lying." "I'm not. She wrote me letters, told me about the children she taught, told me about you, said you were good with numbers." A pause, then, "Miss Rose never talked about her family." "She was private that way," Thaddeus said. "Got that from her mother." A shape emerged from the mine entrance, slowly, ready to bolt at the first wrong move. The boy was thin, too thin. His clothes were ragged, and his face smudged with dirt. But his eyes were bright and watchful, eyes of a survivor. He looked at Thaddeus for a long moment. "You don't look like her," Zachary said. "No, she looked like her mother. Beautiful. Kind." "Miss Rose was kind," the boy agreed. His voice broke slightly on the words. Thaddeus reached slowly into his coat pocket. Zachary tensed, but didn't run. What Thaddeus pulled out was a locket. Silver. Tarnished. He opened it. Inside were 2 photographs. One of a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. The other of that same woman holding an infant. "That's Rose when she was 20, Thaddeus said. "And that's Rose with her mother." He held the locket out, not moving forward, letting the boy come to him. Zachary approached like a wild thing approaching a trap. 1 step, another, close enough to see the photographs. His eyes widened. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Miss Rose." "Yes." The boy's face crumpled. All the fear and grief he'd been holding for 3 months came pouring out. He dropped to his knees in the sand and wept. Weeping that shakes a body and empties a soul. Thaddeus knelt beside him. Didn't touch. Just waited. When the tears finally slowed, Zachary looked up. "They killed her," he said. "They shot her and she didn't do nothing wrong. She was just walking home." "Who?" Thaddeus asked. His voice was gentle, but underneath, something cold and patient waited. "The van gang, all 6 of them. They were in the alley behind the assay office. I was looking for my cat. I saw everything." "Tell me." And Zachary told him, every detail. The whiskey bottles, Silas Van's rage about the failed robbery, the way Rose had tried to back away, the casual cruelty of the draw and the shot, the way she'd died with books scattered in the dirt around her. When he got to the end, his voice dropped to a whisper. "She didn't die right away," Zachary said. "She lived long enough to say something." Thaddeus's breath caught. "What did she say?" The boy's eyes filled with fresh tears. She said, "Tell my papa, I forgive him. Tell him to forgive himself." The words hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. Forgive himself. For what? For choosing the badge over family all those years? For not being there when she needed him? For the life of violence he'd led that had driven Margaret to make him choose? She said that? His voice was barely audible. Yes, sir. Those were her last words. Then she closed her eyes. Thaddeus was very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence, the kind that makes the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. But when he spoke, his voice was soft. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me the truth, for being brave enough to remember." "Are you going to kill them?" Zachary asked. Thaddeus considered the question, considered his answer. "I'm going to give them a chance," he said finally. "One chance to face justice the right way, through the law. And if they don't take it, then I'll do what needs doing." The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "You gonna need help?" Zachary asked. "No. You're going to stay up here, where it's safe." "I'm not safe anywhere, not while they're alive." Thaddeus couldn't argue with that, so he didn't try. Instead, he stood, offered his hand. Zachary took it, let himself be pulled to his feet. "Stay hidden," Thaddeus said. "Stay alive. When this is over, I'll come back for you." "Promise?" "Promise." Thaddeus started back down the canyon. Zachary called after him, "Mr. Calloway?" Thaddeus stopped, looked back. "Be careful. They're mean, and they're scared of nobody." "They will be," Thaddeus said quietly. "They just don't know it yet." The sheriff's office was a squat building with barred windows and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. Thaddeus pushed it open without knocking. Sheriff Marcus Dunn looked up from his desk. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle. His badge was pinned crooked, and his eyes carried the permanent wariness of someone with too many secrets. "Help you?" Dunn asked. But his tone said he already knew who Thaddeus was and didn't want to help at all. "I want Silas Van arrested," Thaddeus said, "for the murder of Rose Calloway." Dunn leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Calloway." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. I have a witness." "Who?" "The Webb boy." Dunn's face went carefully blank. "Zachary Webb ran off months ago. Nobody knows where he is. And even if they did, he's 12 years old. His testimony wouldn't hold up in any court." "Then investigate. Find evidence." "I did investigate. Case is closed. Accidental death during a robbery." "That's a lie, and you know it." Dunn stood. His hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Not threatening. Not yet. But getting there. "Watch your mouth, old man. I don't care who you were once upon a time. In this town, I'm the law." "You're not the law," Thaddeus said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "You're a bought man. Silas Van owns you. Question is what he paid. Money? Fear? Both?" Dunn's face flushed red. "Get out of my office before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." "Do it," Thaddeus said. "Lock me up. Then explain to the territorial marshal why you're protecting a known killer. You got no proof. I have a witness, and I have time. I'll find more." Thaddeus turned to leave, stopped at the door. "Fair warning, Sheriff. I'm giving Van and his men one chance to surrender. Turn themselves in, face trial. If they don't take it, what happens next is on your head." He walked out before Dunn could respond. Behind him, the sheriff stood alone in his office. His hand was shaking as he reached for the whiskey bottle in his desk drawer. Then he reached for something else. A wanted poster. Old, faded, but the face on it was unmistakable. Thaddeus, The Gallows Marshal Calloway, United States Marshal. Wanted for questioning Dodge City Massacre, 1865. Dunn stared at the poster for a long moment. Then he grabbed his hat and went out the back door. He had to warn Van. Thaddeus found the Van gang camped 3 miles outside town, in a draw where a spring fed a scatter of cottonwoods. He rode in openly, no attempt at stealth. Let them see him coming from a quarter-mile away. They were ready when he arrived. 6 men standing in a loose semicircle, hands near guns, eyes hard. Silas Van stood in the center, younger than Thaddeus had expected, maybe 30, lean and wiry, with a face that might have been handsome before cruelty carved lines into it. "You got a lot of nerve, old man," Van said, "riding into our camp alone." Thaddeus stopped his horse 20 feet away, didn't dismount. "I'm here to give you a choice," he said. Van laughed. "That's so. What kind of choice?" "You and your men turn yourselves in to the territorial marshal. Confess to the murder of Rose Calloway. Face trial. Maybe the judge goes light. Maybe you hang. But it's legal. It's the law." The 6 men looked at each other. Then they all started laughing. "You hear that?" Van said to his men. "Grandpa here thinks we're going to turn ourselves in." Thaddeus waited for the laughter to die down. "That's option 1, he said when they finally quieted. "Option 2 is I come back. And when I do, I won't be offering choices anymore." Van's smile faded. "You threatening us?" he asked. "No, I'm giving you information. What you do with it is up to you." Scarface stepped forward. His eyes narrowed as he studied Thaddeus, really studied him. Recognition flickered. "Boss," Scarface said slowly, "I know him." "What are you talking about?" Van snapped. "That badge I saw under his coat back in the saloon. I've seen it before, and I've seen him before." Scarface's voice had gone tight. "Dodge City, 1865. He brought in the Madsen gang." "Brought them in?" Carson asked. "Brought in their bodies, all 9 of them, single-handed." The laughter had died completely now. "They called him the Gallows Marshal," Scarface continued. "Said he never brought anyone back alive who didn't surrender when asked. Said he was faster than thought and twice as deadly." Van looked at Thaddeus with new eyes, evaluating, calculating. "That was a long time ago," Van said finally. "You're old now. Slow." "Test that theory if you want," Thaddeus said. "Or take the offer. Your choice. You've got until sundown tomorrow to decide." He turned his horse. "Hey!" Van shouted. "You don't just ride away after making threats." Thaddeus looked back over his shoulder. "Wasn't a threat," he said. "Just arithmetic. 6 of you, 1 of me. But I've got age and patience and nothing left to lose. You do the math." He rode away slowly, giving them every opportunity to draw on him. None of them did. But as he crested the rise and dropped out of sight, Thaddeus heard raised voices, argument, fear creeping into bravado. Good. Fear made men careless, and careless men made mistakes. Thaddeus took a room at the hotel this time, 2nd floor. Corner room with windows facing 2 directions. He wedged the door shut with a chair and positioned himself where he could see both windows and the hallway beyond the door's transom. The Colt rested on the bedside table. The Winchester leaned against the wall within reach. He didn't expect them to take his offer. Men like Silas Van didn't surrender. They doubled down. They attacked. The question was when. The answer came at 2 in the morning. Thaddeus heard them on the stairs, trying to be quiet, failing. Boots on wood, the creak of floorboards, whispered curses. He was already moving when they hit the door. The chair held for exactly as long as Thaddeus needed it to. 3 seconds while he rolled off the bed and came up with the Colt in his hand. The door splintered inward. 2 men rushed through. Carson first, young and reckless. Dutch right behind him, more cautious but committed. They were fast, young fast, guns already drawn. But Thaddeus was faster. His right hand came up smooth and practiced. 18 years as a marshal, plus another 22 carrying a gun before that. 40 years of muscle memory condensed into a single, fluid motion. The Colt's hammer was already cocked. His finger found the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure. The gun roared in the confined space. Carson was still bringing his pistol to bear when the .45 caliber slug punched through his sternum. The physics were simple and brutal. Lead, traveling at 800 feet per second, met bone and tissue. The bone shattered, the tissue vaporized. The bullet passed through, tearing a path through Carson's heart and left lung, before burying itself in the doorframe behind him. Carson's forward momentum carried him 2 more steps. His brain hadn't yet registered that his heart had stopped beating. Then his legs forgot how to work. He collapsed face down across the threshold. 2.1 seconds had elapsed. Dutch fired wild. Panic shot. The bullet splintered the bedpost where Thaddeus had been sleeping 5 seconds earlier. Thaddeus pivoted right, smooth, unhurried. The Colt tracked and fired in one motion. The bullet took Dutch in the throat. High. Probably meant for the chest, but Dutch had been turning. The result was the same. The slug punched through his windpipe, severing it completely. Bone fragments from his shattered vertebrae tore through muscle and artery. Blood sprayed in a mist that looked black in the lamplight. Dutch dropped his gun and clutched at his neck, made a sound like a kettle boiling, air and blood mixing in a ruined throat. He staggered backward 3 steps, hit the wall, slid down, leaving a dark smear. His legs kicked twice, then he was still. 4 seconds total, from door to silence. Thaddeus stood in the gun smoke, the Colt still leveled, ears ringing from the concussive blasts in the small room. Footsteps pounded in the hallway, running away. At least 1 more had been waiting, smart enough to run when the shooting started. Thaddeus moved to the window, looked down into the street. 3 horses, 4 riders. They scattered in different directions, riding hard into the darkness. He counted. 6 gang members, 2 dead in his hotel room. 4 fled. Van, Scarface, Reeves, Tully. The math was getting simpler. Behind him, Carson and Dutch leaked their lives onto the hotel room floor. Dutch had stopped making sounds. Carson had never made any. Just the wet drip of blood on wood. Thaddeus reloaded the Colt. 2 fresh rounds to replace the 2 spent. Always reload. Always. Doors opened in the hallway. Heads poked out. Saw the carnage. Disappeared. Someone shouted for the sheriff. Thaddeus holstered the Colt and walked out of the room, stepped over the bodies without looking down. The hotel proprietor stood at the top of the stairs. His face was pale, his hands shook. "They came to kill me," Thaddeus said. "I defended myself. Sheriff will want statements. I'll be downstairs." He walked past the proprietor and descended to the lobby. By the time Sheriff Dunn arrived 10 minutes later with 2 young deputies, Thaddeus was sitting in a chair by the cold fireplace, drinking coffee that one of the frightened staff had brought him. Dunn looked at Thaddeus, at the gun on his hip, at the calm in his eyes. "You killed 2 men," Dunn said. "They broke into my room. I defended myself. There's a dozen witnesses who heard them bust down my door. Van's not going to let this go." "I know," Thaddeus said. He took another sip of coffee. "That's what I'm counting on." Dunn stared at him for a long moment. Then one of the young deputies stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 23. His name was Cole Morrison. His hand rested on his gun, but it was shaking. "Mr. Calloway," Deputy Morrison said, "Sheriff Dunn wants you in a cell, for your own protection." Thaddeus set down his coffee cup, looked at the deputy, then at Dunn. "Your protection?" he asked Dunn, "or Van's convenience?" Dunn's face flushed. "You killed 2 men. That's enough reason to hold you until the territorial marshal gets here." "Self-defense, in front of witnesses." "Procedure," Dunn insisted, "just for the night." Thaddeus stood slowly. The 2 deputies tensed, hands moving toward their guns. "You boys really want to do this?" Thaddeus asked quietly. The second deputy, older, maybe 30, swallowed hard. "We got our orders, sir." "Then you'd better shoot me," Thaddeus said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Because I'm not getting in that cell. And if you try to put me there, one of us won't walk away. Maybe all of us." A long silence. Deputy Morrison's gun hand was shaking visibly now. "You're the gallows marshal," Morrison whispered. "I heard the stories. Madsen Gang, the Voss brothers, the Lincoln County War." "Stories," Thaddeus said. "Some true, some not. The part about never missing? I'm 68 years old, son. Arthritis in my hands. Eyes not what they used to be. But I'm still breathing, and my enemies aren't. That part's true." Morrison looked at his partner, then at Sheriff Dunn. Then he lowered his gun. "Go on, Mr. Calloway," Morrison said quietly. "Get out of town before the sheriff finds his courage." "Deputy Morrison," Dunn barked, "I gave you an order." "Yes, sir, you did." Morrison met Dunn's eyes. "And I'm refusing to follow it, because I ain't dying for Van's dirty money, and neither is Patterson." The second deputy nodded agreement, lowered his gun as well. Dunn's face went from red to purple, but he didn't draw his own gun. He was many things, but not suicidal. "You're both fired," Dunn said. "Fine by me," Morrison replied. "Been wanting to quit anyway." Thaddeus nodded to both deputies. Respect to respect. Then he walked out of the hotel into the pre-dawn darkness. Behind him, Dunn stood impotent and furious. And Deputy Cole Morrison smiled for the first time in months. Dawn found Thaddeus in the cemetery, standing at Rose's grave. The wooden marker was simple: her name, her dates, nothing more. He stood there for a long time, holding his hat in his hands. "I found out what happened, Rosie," he said quietly. "Found the boy who saw it. He told me what you said at the end." The wind picked up, carried the smell of sage and morning. "I don't know what I'm supposed to forgive myself for," Thaddeus continued. "For choosing the badge all those years? For the kind of man I was? For not being here when you needed me?" No answer, just the wind. "But I'm trying. I'm giving them chances, like the law says, like you would have wanted. If they don't take them—" He trailed off. Footsteps behind him. Thaddeus turned, hand moving toward his gun. Scarface stood there, alone, hands raised. "Easy, Marshal," Scarface said. "Didn't come to fight." "Then why are you here?" "To tell you something, about Van." Scarface lowered his hands slowly. He killed my father 5 years ago. My old man was the gang's first leader. Van wanted the position, so he put a bullet in him while he slept. Thaddeus studied the man. Why tell me this? Because I've been waiting for someone strong enough to take Van down, someone who won't back off. Scarface met his eyes. I can't do it myself, I'm too deep. But you? You got nothing to lose. You offering to help? I'm offering information. Van's planning to grab the Webb boy, use him as bait. It's happening today, noon, at the Saloon. Thaddeus felt ice in his veins. How do you know? Because I was there when he planned it. Sent men out at first light to find the boy's hiding place. You could have warned me earlier. Could have, but I needed to see if you were as good as the stories say. Last night proved it. Carson and Dutch dead in 4 seconds. You're everything they said. Thaddeus took a step forward. And after, when Van's dead? I ride out, disappear, start over somewhere they don't know my name. No deal. You're going to stand trial for Deputy Webb's murder. Scarface's jaw tightened. I didn't kill Webb. That was all Van and done. Then testify. Clear your name the right way. A long pause. Scarface looked at the grave marker, at Rose's name. All right, Marshal, he said finally. The right way, but first we got to save that boy. We? I'm done running from Van. My father deserves better. That teacher deserved better. Scarface touched the scar on his face. This? Van gave me this when I questioned killing Deputy Webb. Said it was a reminder to keep my mouth shut. Thaddeus nodded slowly. Can I trust you? Probably not, but you don't have much choice. It's 4 against 1 in that saloon. 4 against 2 is better odds. I've faced worse. I know. That's why I'm betting on you. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 men with blood on their hands, standing over the grave of an innocent woman. What's your real name? Thaddeus asked. Jack Vance, but everyone calls me Scarface. All right, Jack. Tell me everything about that saloon. Every door, every window, every angle. And in the growing light of morning, they began to plan. The sun climbed toward noon. Raven Creek knew something was coming. The streets emptied early, shutters closed, doors locked. Even the dogs seemed to sense it, slinking into alleys and under porches. Thaddeus and Scarface sat in the back room of Ben Hutchins' general store, going over the plan one more time. Van will have the boy front and center, Scarface said. Make you come to him. Reeves and Tully will be flanking, probably behind overturned tables. Dunn will be there too, playing sheriff. What about you? Thaddeus asked. I'm supposed to be there. I'll position myself by the bar. When it starts, I'll take Dunn. Can you do that? Scarface touched his scar again. I've been waiting 5 years. I can do it. Ben Hutchins entered with a tray, coffee, bread. Neither man was hungry, but they ate anyway, fuel for what was coming. There's another way, Ben said quietly. You could wait for the territorial marshal. Let the law handle it proper. How long would that take? Thaddeus asked. Week? Maybe 2? The boy doesn't have a week, and Van knows it. Ben nodded. He'd known the answer before he asked. Then at least take this. Ben produced a sawed-off shotgun from beneath the counter. Double barrel, both barrels loaded with buckshot. Belonged to my brother. He's the one Dunn killed 5 years ago." Thaddeus looked at the weapon, then at Ben. "You sure?" "I'm 68 years old, same as you. Too old to use it myself. Too angry to let it gather dust." Ben met his eyes. "My brother's name was Eli. He was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened." "Wait," Thaddeus said. "Eli Hutchins, the bartender at the Lucky Dollar?" "My nephew, named after his father. He knows I'm giving you this." Understanding dawned. The whole town was connected. The whole town had been waiting for someone to stand up. "I'll make it count," Thaddeus said. The church bell began to toll noon. It was time. The Lucky Dollar Saloon had never been so full and so empty at the same time. Van's men occupied the space like an invading army. Tables overturned for cover. Windows watched. Every angle calculated. And there, in the center of the room, sat Zachary Webb. The boy was tied to a chair. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. But he was alive. When the door opened and Thaddeus stepped through, something like hope flickered in Zachary's good eye. Thaddeus took it all in with one sweep, filed it away. Distances, angles. Who would move first? Who would hesitate? Silas Van stood 10 feet behind Zachary, young, confident, his hand resting easy on his gun. To his right, Reeves crouched behind an overturned faro table, heavy-set with small eyes and thick hands that looked like they could strangle a man without much effort. To the left, Tully behind another table, lean and nervous, fingers already twitching near his holster. Sheriff Dunn stood off to the side. His gun was drawn but pointing at the floor. His face was pale and slick with sweat. And there, near the bar, Scarface leaned casual, arms crossed, but his weight was balanced, ready. Behind the bar, Eli Hutchins stood frozen, his hands visible, empty. But Thaddeus knew the shotgun was within reach. "Let the boy go," Thaddeus said. His voice cut through the tense silence. "This is between you and me." "See, that's where you're wrong, old man," Van said. "This is between me and anyone who thinks they can threaten me in my own town." "Your town?" Thaddeus's voice was mild, conversational. "You're just passing through, like all parasites. Eventually the host dies or fights back." Van's smile thinned. "Big words from a man outnumbered 4-1. "5, Sheriff Dunn added, his voice cracked slightly. "4, Scarface said quietly. "I'm not with you anymore, Silas." Van's head snapped toward Scarface. "What?" "I said I'm done. Done following you. Done being scared. Done running from what you did to my father." Van's face twisted. "Your father was weak, just like you." "Maybe, but I'm done being weak." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Thaddeus spoke again. "Last chance, Van. All of you. Drop your guns, walk away, face a judge. It's more mercy than you gave my daughter." Van's expression changed, became something darker, more personal. "Your daughter," he said slowly. "You want to know something funny, Marshal? We've met before." Thaddeus's eyes narrowed. 1864, Dodge City. You arrested a man named Silas Maxwell." Van paused. "My brother." Recognition flickered in Thaddeus's eyes. "The Maxwell case," he said quietly. "That's right. You had him dead to rights. Murder, robbery, assault. But some fancy lawyer got him off on a technicality. Evidence obtained wrong. Search warrant bad. Some legal bullshit. Van's smile was cold. You let the law decide instead of your gun. And you know what my brother did after he walked free? Thaddeus said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He killed 4 more people, robbed 3 banks, shot a sheriff in the back. Van leaned forward. Then he came after you, wanted revenge for the arrest. Found your ranch while you were out on another case. Found your wife and daughter there. The world seemed to slow. He didn't kill them, Van continued. Just scared them, real bad. Threatened them. Made them understand what happened to families of men who crossed the Maxwells. And what did your pretty little wife do? Thaddeus's hands were shaking now. The first time since this all began. She made you quit, Van said. Made you choose between the badge and family. Said she couldn't live with the fear anymore. Couldn't spend every night wondering if some outlaw would come back to finish what my brother started. So you chose family. Hung up your gun. Walked away. Van's voice dropped to a whisper. And 20 years later, I killed your daughter anyway. Funny how that works, ain't it? You tried to be better than you were. Tried to follow the law. Tried to do things the right way. And it cost you everything. The rage in Thaddeus was a living thing now. A fire that had been banked for 18 years, suddenly roaring to life. Where's your brother now? His voice was ice. Dead. I killed him myself 3 years ago. Too reckless. Drew too much attention. Bad for business. Van shrugged. But I learned from watching you, Marshal. I learned that mercy is weakness, that the law is a joke, that the only thing that matters is the gun and the will to use it. You learned wrong, Thaddeus said. Did I? You're about to kill me anyway. Where's your precious law now? Right here. Thaddeus's hand hovered over his gun. I gave you 3 chances, warned you at my camp, offered you surrender, walked into this room and offered mercy. You made your choice every time. That's law. That's justice. That's revenge. No. Thaddeus's voice was granite. Revenge is emotion. This is mathematics. You killed my daughter, threatened to kill this boy, murdered Deputy Webb, terrorized this town for years. The equation is simple. You subtract yourself, or someone subtracts you. Van's hand moved toward his gun. Your mistake, Thaddeus said quietly, was thinking I needed to be more angry. I've been angry for 3 months. Now, I'm just done waiting. Last words, old man? Yes, Thaddeus's eyes were cold as winter water. Some men mistake age for weakness. That mistake costs them everything. The moment hung suspended. Then Zachary did something no one expected. The boy, still tied to the chair, threw himself sideways with everything he had. The chair toppled. Zachary hit the floor, rolling, away from Van, away from the line of fire, and the world exploded. Second, 0. Thaddeus dove left as 4 guns cleared leather simultaneously. His Colt came up mid-dive. Muscle memory from 10,000 draws. Thumb cocking the hammer, finger finding the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure. At the bar, Scarface drew and pivoted toward Sheriff Dunn. Behind the counter, Eli grabbed the shotgun. Second one. Tully was fastest, young fast. His gun came up first, muzzle tracking Thaddeus's dive. But Thaddeus was already firing. The first shot caught Tully in the forehead, dead center. The bullet punched through skull bone and erased everything Tully had ever known in the span of a neuron's misfire. Brain matter and bone fragments sprayed out the back of his head, painting the wall behind him in a grotesque pattern of red and gray. His body went rigid, nerve endings firing one last time. Then he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, his gun clattering unfired to the floor. Second 2. Reeves fired from behind his overturned table. 2 shots, both wild, panic shooting. One bullet blew apart a whiskey bottle on the bar. The other buried itself in the ceiling. Thaddeus rolled behind a table, came up firing. Second shot, Reeves's chest, center mass. The bullet found his heart and stopped it mid-beat. The organ, that muscle that had been pumping blood for 43 years, simply ceased. Reeves looked surprised, confused. He dropped his gun, reached for his chest, found the hole, sat down hard, fell over sideways, dead before his head hit the floor. Second 3. Sheriff Dunn swung his gun toward Thaddeus. Scarface fired first. The bullet caught Dunn in the side, tearing through his liver and kidney. Dunn screamed, turned toward Scarface, raised his gun. Eli's shotgun roared. Both barrels, point-blank range, 10 feet. The buckshot caught Dunn full in the chest. 9 pellets of lead, each one .36 caliber, traveling at 1,200 feet per second. The impact lifted Dunn off his feet and threw him backward into the wall. His chest looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Ribs shattered, lungs shredded, heart obliterated. He was dead before he hit the floor. Second 4. Silas Van had grabbed for Zachary when the boy rolled away. Missed. Now he was exposed. Center of the room, no cover. He drew fast, young fast, desperate fast, fired 3 times, rapid fire. One bullet passed so close to Thaddeus's head that he felt the air displacement. Another buried itself in the table he was using for cover. The third went wide, shattering a mirror behind the bar. Second 5. Thaddeus rose from cover, sighted, fired. The bullet took Van in the chest, left side, just below the collarbone. It was a perfect shot. The kind of shot that comes from decades of practice. The bullet punched through Van's clavicle, shattering it. Continued through the top of his left lung, nicked the subclavian artery, lodged against his spine. Not immediately fatal, but fatal enough. Van staggered. His gun fell from fingers that had suddenly forgotten how to grip. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, looked up at Thaddeus with eyes going dim. "How?" His voice was a whisper. "You're old." "Age doesn't make a man weak," Thaddeus said. "It just makes him tired of killing." He raised the Colt, sighted again. "This is for Rose." The second bullet took Van between the eyes. The back of his skull exploded. Brain matter and blood sprayed across the floor. Van's body jerked once, then his knees buckled, and he fell. Second 6 through 10. Silence, deep, absolute, broken only by the ringing in everyone's ears and the soft whimpering of Zachary, still tied to the overturned chair. Thaddeus stood in the center of the carnage, the Colt still raised, still ready. But there was no one left to shoot. 4 bodies on the floor. Sheriff Dunn blown nearly in half. Tully with a third eye that hadn't been there before. Reeves slumped against the wall, a spreading pool of blood beneath him. Silas Van, face down in a lake of his own making. Smoke hung in the air like fog, the smell of gunpowder and blood and death. Scarface stood by the bar, his gun still raised, staring at Dunn's body. Eli set down the shotgun with shaking hands. Thaddeus lowered his weapon, walked to Zachary. The boy was sobbing. Fear, relief, shock. Thaddeus knelt beside him, cut the ropes binding his hands with a knife from his boot, pulled the boy to his feet. Zachary threw his arms around him and held on like a drowning man holds a rope. "It's done," Thaddeus said quietly. "It's over." The saloon doors burst open. People flooded in. The whole town, it seemed. They'd been watching from windows and doorways, waiting to see who would walk out. Ben Hutchins from the general store, the hotel proprietor, families, children, and a woman pushing through to the front. Clara, 45 years old, dark hair going gray, wearing simple calico. She saw the bodies, saw Zachary clinging to Thaddeus, saw Eli behind the bar looking lost. "Sweet Jesus," someone whispered. "They're all dead," another voice said. "The gallows marshal," a third voice whispered. The stories were true. Clara approached Zachary, held out her hands. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently. "Let's get you cleaned up." Zachary looked at Thaddeus, a question in his eyes. Thaddeus nodded. "Go on. You're safe now." The boy went to Clara. She led him away, her arm around his shoulders. Thaddeus walked to the bar. Eli still stood there, staring at his uncle's shotgun. "Why?" Thaddeus asked. "Sheriff Dunn killed my father," Eli said. His voice was hoarse. 5 years ago. Made it look like a brawl gone wrong. I've been waiting, watching, too scared to act." He looked at the body. "But when you gave them that last chance and Van spat on it, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Thaddeus nodded. "Understood." "You'll need to tell all this to the territorial marshal," he said. "Truth, all of it." "I know." Scarface approached. His gun was holstered now. His hands shook slightly. "My father can rest now," he said. "What's your plan?" Thaddeus asked. "Stay. Face whatever comes. Like you said, the right way." Thaddeus extended his hand. Scarface took it. "Thank you," Scarface said, "for being the kind of man who gives last chances, even to men who don't deserve them." "Everyone deserves one chance," Thaddeus said. "What they do with it determines everything else." He turned to the crowd gathering at the door. Former Deputy Morrison stood there, the young man who'd refused to arrest Thaddeus. "Someone needs to ride for the territorial marshal," Thaddeus said. "Tell him what happened. Tell him the truth." "I'll go," Morrison said. "And when he comes, I'll testify to everything. The corruption, the murders, all of it." Thaddeus reloaded the Colt. 4 spent rounds, 4 fresh ones to replace them. Then he holstered the weapon and walked toward the door. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. He walked out into the noon sun. Behind him, the Lucky Dollar Saloon stood in stunned quiet, its air heavy with gun smoke and the ghosts of dead men. Thaddeus stood in the street for a long moment, looking at the town, at the people emerging from their hiding places, at the beginning of something new. Then he walked toward the cemetery. He had something to tell his daughter. 6 months later, winter snow lay 3 feet deep in the streets of Raven Creek. The creek ran black between banks of ice. Smoke rose from every chimney, straight and thin in the still air. Thaddeus stood in the town cemetery. The grave marker was new, granite, not wood, paid for by subscription from the townspeople. The letters carved deep enough to last a century. Rose Calloway, 1852 to 1884. Teacher, daughter, friend. She taught us all to be better. Thaddeus had brought flowers. They looked fragile against the snow, bright spots of color in a world gone white and gray. "I got him, Rosie," he said quietly. "Got them all. The way you would have wanted. Gave them every chance. They made their choices." The wind picked up, carried snow in small spirals across the graveyard. The territorial marshal came, investigated everything. Scarface testified. Eli testified. Half the town testified. Thaddeus smiled slightly. They ruled it justifiable. Self-defense and defense of others. No charges. He paused. "Zachary's doing well. Clara adopted him, made it legal last month. He's back in school, still jumps at loud noises, but he's getting better." The wind whispered through the snow. "Scarface is staying. Renamed himself Jack Vance. Dropped the Scarface. Says he wants to earn a new name. He's working at Ben's store. Honest work. Trying to make amends." Thaddeus reached into his coat, pulled out a letter. "Town council voted. They want me to stay. Be the marshal. Cole Morrison would be my deputy." He looked at the letter for a long moment. "I told them no. This badge stays buried. I'm done with that life." He knelt, placed the letter on the grave beside the flowers. "But I'll come back, every year, on your birthday. That's a promise." Footsteps behind him, crunching in the snow. Clara approached. She wore a heavy coat against the cold. Her breath steamed in the air. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, "saying goodbye. You don't have to leave, you know. Zachary asks about you every day." "How's he doing?" "Better. Smiles more. Still has nightmares sometimes, but they're getting less." "That's good. A boy needs a mother." "He needs a father, too." Thaddeus turned to look at her. "You're doing fine. He doesn't need an old man with too much blood on his hands." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe that old man needs something to live for besides ghosts and guilt." They stood in silence for a moment. "Rose used to talk about you," Clara said. "Those Tuesday evenings when she taught me reading. She said her father was the most honorable man she knew. Said you'd given up everything to try to be better than you were. Said she was proud of you for that." Thaddeus felt something catch in his throat. "She said that?" "She did. Said it took more courage to put down the gun than to pick it up." The snow continued to fall, soft, quiet, covering the world in white. "The new marshal arrived yesterday," Clara continued. "Deputy Morrison from the territorial office. Good man, honest. He's already making changes. Found evidence that Dunn had been taking bribes from Van for 2 years. Blood money. Returned it to the families." "Good. They recovered money from that stage robbery, too. Used it to build a new schoolhouse. Named it after Rose. There's going to be a dedication. Spring thaw. We'd like you to be there." "I'll be there," Thaddeus said. Clara reached out, touched his arm. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For Rose, for Zachary, for all of us. You gave us back our town." "Didn't do it for you," Thaddeus said. "Did it for her." "I know, but we're grateful anyway." She left him alone with the grave. Thaddeus stood there until the sun touched the western peaks, until the light turned gold and the shadows grew long. Then he placed his hand on the cold granite. "I forgive myself, Rosie," he whispered. "Don't know if I should. Don't know if I deserve to. But you said to, so I'm trying." He stood, brushed snow from his coat. "Sleep well," and he walked away. 15 years later, April 1899. The young man who'd been Zachary Webb stood on a platform in the center of Raven Creek. He was 27 now, tall, lean. His face had lost its boyish softness, but kept its honest eyes. He wore a badge on his chest, silver, 5 points, county sheriff. The town had turned out for the dedication. The statue stood 10 feet tall, bronze, weathered already from 3 Montana winters since its installation. It depicted an old man in a long coat, his hat pulled low, one hand resting on a gun belt. The plaque at its base read, "Thaddeus, the Gallows Marshal Calloway, 1816 to 1896. Justice delayed is not justice denied." Sheriff Webb cleared his throat. The crowd quieted. "Most of you remember Thaddeus Calloway," he began. "Some of you knew him as the man who cleaned out the van gang. Some knew him as Rose Calloway's father. But I knew him as the man who saved my life, twice." He paused, looked out at the faces. Clara stood in the front row, white-haired now, still strong, still present. Next to her, a young woman holding a baby. The woman was 23. Her name was Rose Webb, named for the teacher who'd never known she'd be remembered this way. "Mr. Calloway taught me something," Sheriff Webb continued. "He taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about giving people choices and living with the consequences when they choose wrong." He looked up at the statue. "He also taught me to shoot. Every summer when he came to visit, patient, careful, never rushed. He said a gun was a tool, no better or worse than the man holding it. And he said the hardest thing about carrying a gun wasn't learning to use it. It was learning when not to." A murmur of agreement from the crowd. "Before he died," Webb said, "he told me something. He said, 'Some men mistake age for weakness. That mistake costs them everything.' But then he said something else, something I think about every day." He paused. He said, "Age doesn't weaken a man's aim. It steadies his hand and sharpens his resolve. Because an old man has lived long enough to know what's worth killing for and what's worth dying for." Sheriff Webb reached down, picked up a cloth-covered object from the platform. He pulled the cloth away. The Colt Peacemaker gleamed in the spring sunlight. Walnut grips worn smooth. Custom trigger. The weapon that had ended Silas Van. "He left this to me," Webb said, "along with one instruction. Only draw it when you've given them every other choice." He holstered the weapon. His weapon now. Thaddeus Calloway never wore a badge again after that day in the Lucky Dollar Saloon. He went back to his ranch in Wyoming, lived quiet, died peaceful at age 80 in his sleep with his boots off. The sheriff's voice grew softer. But he came back here every year, on Rose's birthday, without fail, for 12 years, even when he was sick, even when it was hard, because he'd made a promise, and Thaddeus Calloway kept his promises. He looked out at the crowd. That's who we're honoring today. Not a gunfighter, not a legend. A father who loved his daughter, a man who kept his promises. Someone who understood that the truest strength is knowing when not to fight, and having the courage to fight anyway when there's no other choice. He stepped back from the podium. The crowd applauded, not loud, respectful, the kind of applause given to honor the dead and remember the lessons they left behind. Clara stood, walked to the statue, placed a bouquet of wildflowers at its base. Young Rose followed, added her own flowers. The baby in her arms reached out to touch the bronze, innocent, unknowing. One by one, others came forward. The whole town, each adding something: flowers, notes, small tokens. Jack Vance came forward, no longer Scarface, just Jack. 63 years old now, owner of Hutchins General Store since Ben died. He placed a worn book at the statue's base, McGuffey's Reader, the one Rose had given Clara all those years ago. "For teaching us all," he said quietly, "that it's never too late to choose the right way." Eli Hutchins came next, 53 now, still running the Lucky Dollar, though it was different now. Respectable, a place where families could eat dinner without fear. He placed an old marshal's badge at the statue's base, tarnished, 5 points. "This was his," Eli said. "He left it with me before he went back to Wyoming that last time. Said I should give it to someone who'd earned it, someone who understood what it meant." He looked at Sheriff Webb. "I think you've earned it, son." Webb came down from the platform, picked up the badge, turned it over in his hands. The same badge Thaddeus had carried for 18 years, the same badge he'd buried for 18 more. Webb pinned it to his vest, next to his county sheriff badge. 2 badges, 2 promises, 1 legacy. The sun climbed higher. Raven Creek went about its business. But the statue stood, would stand for generations, a reminder that justice, when it finally comes, arrives on the backs of men willing to pay the price. And sometimes, those men are 68 years old, with silver beards and steady hands, and hearts full of grief turned to purpose. Sheriff Zachary Webb stood at the statue, his hand on the cold bronze. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for life, for lessons, for showing me that strength isn't about how fast you draw. It's about knowing when not to." The wind picked up, carried the scent of spring flowers and new beginnings. In that wind, if you listened close enough, you could almost hear a voice, gruff, kind, patient. Some lines, once drawn, cannot be crossed. Not by greed, not by guns, not by time itself. Age doesn't make a man weak. Sometimes it just makes him ready. And somewhere, in a quiet cemetery 200 miles southeast, on a ranch in Wyoming, an old man rested beneath a granite marker that read, "The legacy lived on." In a boy who became a sheriff, in a town that learned to stand, in a daughter's last words of forgiveness that changed a father's final years. Justice had been served, not clean, not pretty, but served nonetheless. And that, in the end, was what mattered.